I learned too late that when someone decides you are a failure, your absence isn't seen as a sacrifice. It's seen as proof. My stepmother told 200 people at my father's memorial I'd been fired from a desk job. She didn't realize the man with my coordinates inked on his forearm was already walking to the microphone. My name is Sable Thornton. I'm 44 years old. For 18 years, I've worked as a field intelligence officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency, under a civilian cover that says I manage database diagnostics for a contractor called Database Diagnostics. My father knew the truth. He was the only one in the family I ever told. He died 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, and his second wife, Vivian, took the obituary, the church arrangements, the seating chart, and the memorial program away from the funeral home before the body was even in the ground. The church is in the small Pennsylvania town where my father retired, Methodist, built in 1908. Varnished oak floors that magnify every footstep into something you can hear from the vestibule. November. In that part of the country smells like dead leaves and impending snow, and the morning of the service the sky was the color of wet slate. I parked in the lot at 10:42 a.m. The service was set for 11 sharp. Flag presentation at 11:45. I sat in the car for 3 minutes longer than I needed to, with the heat off, rubbing the joint where my left knee used to be. The reconstructed one. 6 screws, 2 pins, a titanium plate they put in 12 years ago at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center after I got hit during an exfiltration in the Balkans. The cold makes it ache deep, the way an old foundation aches in a freeze. I sat there and pressed my thumb into the meat of my thigh and tried to convince the knee to behave for the next 2 hours. In the glove box, behind my driver's license, I keep a folded note from my father, 3 lines in his pencil handwriting. I know what it costs. I'm proud. He wrote it the day I got back from Germany. I didn't read it. I just touched the edge of the paper through the leather, the way some people touch a cross. The program was tucked under the wiper. Vivian's doing, I'd find out later. I pulled it free before I got out. The cover had my father's photograph. Arthur Thornton, 1949 to last month. Below it, in serif type, survived by his loving wife, Vivian Thornton, and their daughter, Clara Thornton. My name wasn't there. I read it twice. I put it on the passenger seat. Then I got out of the car and walked up the church steps. The hitch sharpened on the 3rd step. Always does, in cold. Vivian was at the door, greeting attendees. She wore black wool and a single strand of pearls, and her hair had been done that morning. She had the program stack in her left hand. When she saw me, she did the thing she's been doing for 20 years. She smiled with her mouth, kept her eyes flat, and half turned her shoulder toward the next guest before I'd cleared the door. Sable, you came. She said it the way you'd say the rain came. She handed me a program that didn't have my name on it. My left knee ground against the joint, the same knee they bolted back together in Landstuhl after the op went bad. I didn't say a word. The man behind me in the charcoal wool coat said good morning to her, and she pivoted toward him fully, and I kept walking. He was older, late 60s maybe, with gray at his temples and a way of standing that I recognized before I recognized him. The way a person stands when they've spent 30 years in rooms where they had to know every exit. I didn't look back. I filed him. 3 rows back, left aisle. I noted it the way you note anything in a new room. I closed the program and held it against my coat and walked down the center aisle. There's a moment in any operation when you realize the plan you walked in with is no longer the plan. You don't react. You don't make a face. You adjust. You catalog the new variables, and you keep moving like nothing has changed, because the worst thing you can do is signal to the room that you've noticed. The front row was reserved, white ribbons across the pew. Clara was already seated on the aisle in a black dress that didn't quite fit her, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her, in what should have been my chair, was a woman I'd never seen before. 60s, blonde, the kind of expensive casual that says country club. Vivian's tennis partner. I'd heard the name once on a phone call with my father. Patricia something. Clara looked up. She saw me. Her face did a small confused thing, the muscles around her mouth tightening like she was about to ask a question. Then she looked down at her hands. I kept walking. I passed row 2, row 3. I noticed the man in the charcoal coat had already taken a seat there on the aisle. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. We did the thing two professionals do in a public space when they recognize each other and have not been introduced. Nothing. I sat in row 8, on the aisle, far enough back that no one in the front rows would have to turn to see me, close enough that I could still hear the eulogies without straining. The math of the seating was very clean. I'd been moved exactly far enough to be present and exactly far enough to be erased. My knee ground against the joint when I sat down, the old, deep, mechanical grind. I exhaled slowly through my nose and pressed my right thumb across the small black coordinates tattooed on the inside of my left wrist. 43 degrees, 51 minutes north, 18 degrees 24 minutes east. The exact GPS of a service road outside a village in the mountains south of Sarajevo, where a Toyota Hilux with a busted left taillight waited 4 minutes longer than it was supposed to wait, with the engine running while I dragged a junior case officer named Marcus Hayes across 400 meters of frozen mud with a 7.62 round in his abdomen and a shattered left patella of my own. I pressed my thumb until the ink disappeared under it. The woman next to me in row 8 was in her late 50s in a navy coat. Friend of my father's from the Rotary Club, I think. She looked at the program in my lap, then at me, and gave me a polite small-town smile. "Are you family, dear?" "Daughter." "Oh." She glanced at the program. The space where my name wasn't. She didn't know what to say. "From his first marriage," I said. "It's all right." She nodded the way people nod when they've decided not to ask. Then, because Methodists in Pennsylvania can't help themselves, she said, "And what do you do, sweetheart?" "I manage database diagnostics," I said, "for a federal contractor." "That sounds interesting." "It's mostly spreadsheets." She smiled and turned back toward the front. I had practiced that exchange 1,000 times in airports and rental car counters, and chairs exactly like this one. The trick is the boredom. You have to actually be bored when you say it. If you sell it too hard, they remember you. She didn't remember me. She was already looking at the casket. I want to tell you something before this goes any further, because if you've ever sat at a service where someone was telling your father's story and getting half of it wrong, you already know the kind of quiet I'm describing. Keep watching. 12 years ago in May, Clara graduated from high school. Pittsburgh suburbs. Hot day. There's a photograph somewhere of her in the gown holding the rolled diploma with Vivian on one side and my father on the other. I'm not in it. I wasn't there. What Vivian told Clara and Clara's friends and the relatives who asked was that I couldn't afford the plane ticket, that I'd taken a government secretary job after college and had never really gotten my life together, and that this was the kind of thing I did, the kind of person I was. And Clara should try not to take it personally, because Sable just wasn't a family-oriented adult. What I was actually doing that week was lying on a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, watching a clear plastic tube drain pink fluid out of my left knee into a bag clipped to the side of the bed. The surgery had been 3 days earlier. They'd told me I might walk normally again. They were wrong about that, but it was a kind thing to say at the time. I was 20 pounds lighter than when I'd flown out. My hair was filthy. I had not slept more than 2 hours in a row in 14 days. The last thing I remembered clearly from the op was the copper smell of blood and spent brass on that service road, the stiff, heavy canvas of my extraction vest cutting into my shoulders, the weight of haze across my back. The last thing I remembered from the day before that was the hum of servers in a windowless SCIF, the metallic click of a cipher lock, the particular quiet of a room that does not officially exist. Marcus Hayes was 2 floors up, in a different ward, breathing through a tube. We were not allowed to visit each other. The op was still classified at a level that meant we technically had not met. My father knew. He was the only one. I called him from a satellite line that crackled and dropped twice, and I told him I was fine, that I'd be home in 6 weeks, and that I was going to miss Clara's graduation. He didn't ask me anything. He just said, "I'll tell her you tried." And then he said the thing he always said when he didn't know what else to say. He said, "I'm proud." He didn't tell Clara I tried. He wasn't allowed to. Vivian had already taken control of that narrative, the way she took control of every narrative she could get her hands on. And by the time my father got home from the graduation, Clara had already absorbed the version where I just hadn't bothered to come. I want to be honest with you. I made the choice. I knew when I took the assignment that there were going to be things I missed. Clara's graduation was one of them. Her wedding 2 years later was another. The week my father had his first heart attack, I was in Bahrain with a phone I couldn't answer. I am not going to pretend my silence didn't cost anyone anything. It cost Clara a sister, in any meaningful sense of the word. She grew up believing the version of me my stepmother sold her, and that wasn't only Vivian's fault. It was mine for not being there to be anything else. I knew all of that when I walked into the church. I knew all of that when I sat down in row 8. What I didn't know yet was that Vivian was going to take it one step further, that she had decided, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, that the only way to fully close the book on me was to do it publicly, in front of 200 people, with my father's casket between us and a folded American flag on a stand behind the pulpit. The organist finished the prelude. The pastor stepped up. He read from Ecclesiastes, the part about a time for every purpose. He talked about Arthur's service in Vietnam, his 31 years at the steel mill, his Rotary work, his love of fishing on the Allegheny. He didn't mention that Arthur had 2 daughters. He'd been given a script. I could see Vivian's hand in the cadence of it. Then Clara got up and read a short piece she'd written about her father teaching her to drive in a church parking lot exactly like this one. It was sweet. She cried a little. She did not mention me. Then Vivian walked to the podium. She set down a leather folio. She adjusted the microphone with 2 small, deliberate movements, the way someone adjusts a thing they consider theirs. She looked out at the room and let the silence sit for 1 beat, 2 beats, 3. The dry heat from the floor vents pushed up the back of my legs. The lilies on the casket were so heavy in the air I could taste them. She started with Arthur, their meeting, their marriage, the home they'd built. She said an hour about every part of his life, including the parts that had happened before her. She talked about Clara. She talked about Patricia, sitting in my chair, who had been such a comfort to the family in this difficult time. Then she paused. She looked down at her notes. She looked up. And she found me in row 8 on the aisle. She pointed. 200 heads turned. "There is one more thing I feel I have to say," she said, "because Arthur was an honest man, and he would want honesty here today." My knee began to throb in time with my pulse. I pressed my thumb into the coordinates. My stepdaughter, Sable, is here today. Some of you know her. Most of you don't, because Sable has not been a part of this family for over a decade. She let that land. I want to be gentle about this, but I also want to be truthful. Sable lost a government desk job for cause. She's been too ashamed to attend family gatherings for a decade. She has no right to his flag. The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It went still in the particular way a room goes still when 200 people have just decided simultaneously that they are watching something they cannot unwatch. I felt the woman beside me, the one who had asked if I worked in government, shift away from me by about an inch. Not cruel, just instinctive, the way a body moves when it doesn't want to be associated with the thing about to happen. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at the brass cross on the wall behind her, and I counted the points. 4. I already knew there were 4. I counted them anyway. My left knee was a low, grinding hum. The cold from the church floor had worked up through the soles of my flats and into the reconstructed joint, and the joint was telling me, the way it had been telling me for 12 years, that it remembered. The plates, the screws, the drain tube, the morphine drip in Landstuhl, the fluorescent light over the bed that buzzed at the same pitch as the heating vent in this church. I pressed my right thumb over the small black numbers on my inner left wrist. 43 degrees 51 minutes north, 18 degrees 24 minutes east. I did not move otherwise. Vivian was still talking. She had moved past the flag and was now into what she called the difficult question of what to do about Sable going forward. She was suggesting, with great softness, that the family needed to be honest with itself, that pretending was not love, that Arthur, were he here, would want kindness, but also clarity. She said the word clarity twice. A man 2 rows in front of me turned his head halfway and looked at me out of the corner of his eye. I did not return the look. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I kept my thumb on the coordinates. The wool of my coat smelled faintly of the cedar closet I'd taken it out of yesterday morning in a hotel room in Alexandria before the drive up. In the 3rd row, on the aisle, a man in a charcoal wool coat set both hands on his knees. I did not see it. I felt it, the way you feel a shift in a room you've been trained to read. Marcus Hayes stood up. He did not stand up quickly. He stood up the way a man stands up when he has already made the decision and is now simply executing it. He buttoned the middle button of his coat. He stepped into the aisle. He turned toward the podium. Vivian was mid-sentence. Something about respect. Something about the dignity of the service. She saw him moving. She stopped. "Excuse me," she said, with the small, tight smile of a woman who does not understand why she is being interrupted. "I'm not quite finished. If you could please wait until—" "I won't be long, ma'am," Hayes said. His voice was not loud. It carried the way a voice carries when the person speaking has spent 20 years in rooms where nobody raises their voice because nobody has to. He kept walking. Vivian's hand fluttered to her pearls. She looked at the minister. The minister, who had been standing quietly to the left of the casket with his hands clasped, did not move to intervene. The minister, I would later learn, had served 2 tours as a Navy chaplain. The minister knew the shape of what was about to happen before anyone else in the room did. Hayes reached the podium. Vivian did not step aside. He waited. 1 full second. 2. He looked at her the way a man looks at a door he intends to walk through, whether it opens or not. She stepped aside. He adjusted the microphone. The metal of the stand scraped against itself, a small dry sound that carried into every corner of the sanctuary. He set his hands on either side of the podium. He looked at the casket first. Not the room. The casket. He stood there for what could not have been more than 4 seconds and felt like much longer. Then he looked up. "My name is Marcus Hayes," he said. "I served with Arthur Thornton's daughter." The room did not understand yet. I could feel the room not understanding. 200 people recalibrating, slowly, because the sentence did not fit any of the categories Vivian had just spent 11 minutes constructing. I'm going to ask your patience for about 90 seconds, he said, and then I'll sit back down. He began to unbutton his left cuff. He did it the way a man unbuttons a cuff when he has done it 10,000 times. One button, then the next. He folded the cuff back once, then again, then a third time, up past his forearm, exposing skin that was paler than his hands and crossed with the kind of fine scars a person collects over a career they cannot describe at dinner parties. On the inside of his left forearm, in small black numerals, were the coordinates: 43 degrees 51 minutes north, 18 degrees 24 minutes east. He held the arm out, palm up, toward the room. He did not lift it high. He did not perform it. He simply turned his wrist so the light from the chandelier above the casket caught the ink. "These are coordinates," he said. "They mark a specific point of ground in the Balkans. I had them inked on me 11 years ago, about a year after I left that point of ground alive." He let his arm rest on the podium. The sleeves stayed rolled. I was a junior case officer at the time. The operation does not need to be named here, and most of it I am not authorized to discuss in this building or any other. What I am authorized to say is this: I was hit. I went down. The officer I was with was also hit. She was hit in the left knee. The round shattered the joint. He paused. He looked directly at Vivian for the first time, not with anger, with something flatter and more terrible than anger. She carried me 400 meters to the extraction vehicle. He turned his eyes back to the room. "I am standing here today because the woman you just described as a fired secretary carried me 400 meters with a shattered knee to an extraction point." I heard Clara, in the front row, make a small sound. Not a word. A sound. Hayes went on. "I retired last year as a senior field officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency. The officer in question is still serving. Her cover is her own business, and I will not breach it here. What I will tell you is that across 4 deployments together, in 3 theaters I am not naming, she has done work for this country that the people in this room will never read about in any newspaper. She has done it under cover that requires her to absorb, in silence, exactly the kind of speech we have just heard from this podium." His voice did not rise. "That is the cost of the work. Most of us learn to live with it. Some of us have families who learn to live with it alongside us. Arthur Thornton was one of those families. He knew what his daughter did. He never spoke of it because he was not permitted to, and because he understood what permission meant. He asked me, 8 years ago, to be present at his memorial when it came. He used the phrase, 'when it matters.' I did not fully understand what he meant by that until about 4 minutes ago. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. I did not move. My thumb was still on the coordinates. My knee was still grinding. The heating vent was still humming. I felt 200 heads begin to turn toward row 8, and I kept my eyes on Hayes, because if I looked at the room, I would lose something I could not afford to lose in public. "Sable," he said. That was all. Just my name. Spoken the way he had spoken it in a stairwell in Sarajevo with blood in his mouth. I gave him the smallest nod a person can give. He turned back to the room. "The burial flag goes to the next of kin recognized by the deceased," he said. "Arthur Thornton recognized his daughter. I have, in my coat pocket, a letter he wrote me 18 months ago confirming his wishes. I did not expect to need it today. I am glad I brought it." He patted the breast of his coat once. He did not produce the letter. He did not need to. He looked at Vivian. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorrier for what you just said about a woman you do not know. You never asked where she was. You just enjoyed the empty chair." He turned slightly, so the room could hear it too. "He knew what she was, Vivian. That's why he gave her the flag, and left you the audience." Vivian's mouth opened. That's, she said, that's a classified, you can't just. She did not finish the sentence. The sentence had nowhere to go. She looked at the minister. The minister looked at the floor. She looked at the funeral director standing by the side door. The funeral director was already moving, quietly, to the podium, because the funeral director had been doing this job for 30 years and knew when a service needed to be guided gently back onto its rails. Hayes stepped away from the microphone. He did not roll his sleeve back down. He walked back up the aisle toward row 3, his cuff still folded above his elbow, the coordinates still visible to anyone whose eyes followed him. Eyes followed him. He sat down. The funeral director took the microphone and said, in the calm, low voice of his profession, that the family would now proceed to the graveside, and that the flag presentation would take place there as scheduled at 11:45. He did not look at Vivian when he said it. Nobody looked at Vivian. I looked at Vivian. She was still standing to the left of the podium, one hand on her pearls, the other flat against the wood as if she needed it to stay upright. Her mouth was working around words that were not arriving. Her eyes moved across the room, searching for the sympathetic faces she had been collecting all morning, and finding none of them. Patricia, in the front row, in my chair, was looking at her lap. The tennis friends 2 rows back were looking at the stained glass. The Rotary couple were looking at each other in the particular way couples look at each other when they are silently agreeing to leave early. In the front row, Clara stood up. She did not look at her mother. She stepped out of the pew into the aisle and turned. Not toward the casket, not toward the side door, toward row 8. She started walking. Vivian, at the podium, said her name. Clara! Then again, sharper. Clara! Clara did not stop. She walked the length of the center aisle with 200 people watching her. Past the 3rd row where Marcus Hayes sat with his sleeves still rolled. Past the 5th row. Past the 6th and the 7th. And she stopped at the end of my pew. She looked down at me. Her eyes went to my left wrist, where my thumb was still pressed over the small black numerals. She had seen Hayes's forearm. She was working out the math. Sable, she said. Her voice was very young. Can I sit with you? I moved my coat off the seat beside me. She sat down. She did not touch me. She put her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead at the casket, at our father, and her shoulders began to shake, very slightly, in the small contained way of a person who has just understood that the story she has been told about her own family for 12 years was written by someone who was lying. At the podium, Vivian gripped the wood with both hands. Clara, she said, a 3rd time. Clara did not turn around. The minister, who had been standing to the side of the chancel through all of it, stepped forward. He was a thin man with white hair and a quiet voice, and he had known my father for 30 years. He looked at Vivian for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives when he is choosing between kindness and clarity, and then he gently took the microphone from her hand. Mrs. Thornton, he said, please sit down. She did not move at first. Her hand stayed on the wood, white-knuckled, as if releasing it would mean admitting something. Vivian, he said again, softer, sit down. She sat, not in the front row. The front row had Clara's empty seat now, and Patricia, and a gap where Vivian had been standing minutes ago when she still had the room. She sat instead in the 2nd row, on the aisle, alone, her pearls catching the light from the high windows. The minister adjusted the microphone. He looked out over the 200 faces, all of them rearranged now in the small invisible ways a room rearranges when authority has shifted. The flag, he said, will be presented to Sable Thornton, as Arthur instructed me, in writing, 4 months ago. He looked down the center aisle, found me in the 8th row, and gave me a small nod. Whenever you're ready. I stood up. My left knee caught at the joint, that familiar grind of titanium against scar tissue, and I let it. I did not try to disguise the hitch. I walked the length of the aisle the way I had walked into the church an hour earlier, with the same uneven gait, and this time the room watched me differently. 200 people who had spent the last decade believing a story were now watching the woman the story had been about. And they were doing so the quiet recalculations that people do when they realize the furniture of a room has been moved while they were looking the other way. The honor guard was waiting at the casket. 2 airmen in dress blues, very young, very still. They lifted the flag with the precise economy of people who have done this many times, and they folded it in the slow triangle, corner over corner, until it was the dense, compact bundle that always seems heavier than fabric should be. The senior airman turned to me. He held the flag out in both hands. On behalf of the President of the United States, the Department of the Air Force, and a grateful nation. I took it. The weight settled across my forearms, against the wool of my coat, against the dull throb in my knee, and I held it, the way you hold something that has been given to you on someone else's behalf. I walked back up the aisle with the flag in my hands. Clara was waiting in row 8. She slid out into the aisle and walked beside me, not touching me, just walking. We passed Vivian in the second row. Vivian did not look up. The cemetery was a quarter-mile from the church. Most people drove. Clara and I walked. The wind had picked up. It came across the open ground from the north, smelling of dead leaves and the metallic edge of snow that had not yet arrived, and my knee began to hum in earnest, that deep, low pulse that meant I would feel it tomorrow and the day after. Clara walked slowly so I could keep her pace. "Your mother sent me a text," I said. "I know. I saw her phone." "What did it say?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "She told you not to come." "Yes." "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't." We walked another 20 yards. "Sable." "Yes." "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She was 30. She had been 18 when I was in Landstuhl. She had been 18 when she walked across that graduation stage without me in the crowd, and she had grown up inside that story the way a fish grows up inside the shape of its bowl. "You were a kid," I said. "It wasn't yours to carry." "It is now." I did not answer that. I did not need to. She had said the right thing. At the gravesite, the crowd was smaller, maybe 60 people. The rest had quietly peeled off after the service, the way people do when they cannot decide which face to wear and so choose to wear none. Marcus Hayes was there. He stood at the back of the small gathering, sleeve buttoned again now, coat closed, and when our eyes met across the grass, he did not smile. He nodded once, the nod of a man acknowledging another man's father. Then he stepped back and let the family stand at the grave. The committal was brief. The minister spoke. The honor guard played taps from a small portable speaker because there had been no buglers available that week, and somehow the recorded notes carried more weight in the cold air than a live horn would have. When it was over, people began to drift toward their cars. Vivian stood at the edge of the gathering with 2 women I did not recognize. They were holding her elbows the way you hold someone who has just been told bad news. She did not look at me. She did not look at Clara. She allowed herself to be led toward a black sedan, and the sedan pulled away, and the gravel crunched under the tires, and that was the last I saw of her that day. I learned the rest in pieces, the way you learn anything when you are not in the room. The Rotary luncheon 2 weeks later moved forward without Vivian on the planning committee. No one told her she had been removed. They simply stopped including her on the email chain, and when she finally noticed and called the chair was in a meeting and did not call back. The next month, she was not on the email chain either. The country club kept her membership because country clubs keep memberships, but the Tuesday foursome found a 4th who was not her. Patricia stopped picking up. The tennis partner who had taken my front row seat sent a short note that used the phrase, taking some space, and did not propose a date for the space to end. The pastor, who had known my father for 30 years, did not call her. He had been at the microphone. He had said, "Please sit down." There are some things a pastor does not walk back from, and Vivian had heard him say it in front of 200 people, and she did not return to that church. I heard most of this from Clara. Clara heard it from her own friends, who heard it from their mothers, who had been in the pews. The reporting chain was its own confirmation. The community had reorganized, and the new shape did not have a seat for Vivian at the head of any table. She sent me one text 6 weeks after the funeral. "I think we should talk." I read it twice. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter. I made coffee. I drank the coffee. I picked the phone up again, and I did not respond. A month after that, another text. I was wrong about a lot of things. I read that one once. I did not put the phone down. I typed 3 words and then deleted them. I typed 2 more and deleted those. In the end, I did not answer that one either, because the right answer was not yet inside me, and I have learned not to send words I have not yet earned. Clara asked me once if I would ever speak to her mother again. "Sometime," I said. "Maybe, not yet." "That's fair." "It isn't about fair." "I know." Clara came to my apartment 3 weeks after the memorial. She brought a bottle of wine that was too expensive and a folder of questions she had written down on a yellow legal pad. She wanted to know about Landstuhl, about the knee, about the coordinates, about what my father had known and when he had known it, about the graduation I had missed and where I had actually been that day. I told her what I could. I told her about the asset and the road and the 400 meters, and the way Hayes had looked at me when I picked him up off the gravel. I told her about the surgery and the second surgery and the third. I told her about the note I keep folded behind my driver's license, the one in our father's handwriting, the one that says I know what it costs. I'm proud. She read it twice. She handed it back to me with both hands, the way the airman had handed me the flag. "He never said anything," she said. "Not even to me. He just carried it. That was the deal. And you carried him carrying it. That was the deal, too." She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "I want to know the rest. Whatever you can tell me. Over years. I'm not in a hurry." "That works." "And Sable." "Yes." "I'm not him. I can't carry it the way he did, but I can sit next to it." I looked at my sister, 30 years old, holding a glass of wine she had bought because she did not know what else to bring, and I thought about all the ways a family can be broken and the few small ways it can be rebuilt, one true sentence at a time. "Sit next to it," I said. "That's enough." The cemetery was quiet when the last of the 60 people drifted toward their cars. Clara had not left my side. We walked to the headstone together. The earth around it was still raw. I lowered myself down slowly, favoring the left knee, and sat on the cold ground with my back against the stone and the flag, the folded triangle from the service, across my lap. I pressed my right thumb over the coordinates on my inner left wrist. Clara sat down beside me on the cold ground, the way you sit beside someone when you have decided to stop standing apart. She looked at my wrist. She looked at it a long time. "Those numbers," she said, "are those the same ones he had on his arm?" "Yes." "What do they mean?" I told her. I told her about the service road outside the village, the Toyota Hilux with the busted tail light, the 4 minutes it waited with the engine running. I told her what the ground felt like under my boots, and what Hayes had weighed and how far 400 meters is when your knee is in pieces. I told her about Landstuhl, the drain tube, the fluorescent light that buzzed at the same pitch as the heating vent in that church. I told her about the graduation I had missed and where I'd actually been that day. She listened with her shoulder against mine and the November wind cutting across the open ground. My knee throbbed. The flag was heavy on my lap. The coordinates pressed warm against my thumb. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs the right person to hear it. If you have ever sat in a room while someone else told the story of your life and got every single word of it wrong and chose not to correct them, because the correction would have cost more than the silence, I want you to leave a comment and tell me about it. Tell me where you were sitting. Tell me what you didn't say. I read them. I read all of them. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now, before you close the tab, before the moment passes, because I have more of these stories to tell, and I would like you in the room when I tell them. Hit the bell so you know when the next one arrives. I'll be here. Stay warm.